I still remember the rain that day in Seattle, streaking down the glass as Miranda Pierce told me, "You're not leadership material, Ava." It was one of those moments that burned itself into my memory, the sort of comment you think about on long walks home, or when you hear your name in someone else's mouth. I didn't know then how those words would become a quiet drumbeat, pushing me toward a path neither of us could imagine. It was the kind of morning that made the city feel like an old vinyl record, all crackle and slow rhythm, with rain muffling the noise of traffic on 3rd Avenue. Our office, perched above the Pike Place Market, smelled like burnt espresso and anticipation. The hum of computers and the soft thwack of keys were as much a part of the scenery as the skyline itself. I had grown to love these small rituals, wrapping my hands around a chipped mug, watching people rush by below, catching glimpses of the Space Needle through half-fogged windows. But no amount of routine ever made it easier to be a woman aiming for leadership in tech. I led a team of 4 smart, capable people who listened when I spoke and built off my ideas. Our latest project, a predictive analytics module for the company's flagship product, was humming along ahead of schedule. I was proud of that, even if the victories were sometimes quiet. In those days, I still believed that hard work and clean code spoke for themselves. Miranda Pierce joined Skylab in April, just as cherry blossoms began to litter the sidewalks. She breezed in on a storm of crisp blazers and decisive footsteps, the kind of executive who made interns nervous and managers straighten their spines. Miranda had a way of speaking in bullet points, as if conversation were another spreadsheet column. She rarely smiled, and when she did, it looked like she was practicing for a press release. From the start, she reshaped the company with a ruthless kind of grace, streamlining departments, reorganizing teams, and holding meetings that felt more like performance reviews. Her changes made sense on paper, but there was a chill in the air that hadn't been there before. Jared Lee, my mentor since I first joined Skylab, took it all in stride. He was the kind of senior engineer who wore flannel even in June and always left his office door cracked for questions or bad jokes. Jared noticed the tension before I was ready to admit it. "You know, Ava," he said one afternoon, pushing a mug of Pike Place coffee across my desk, "don't let them write your story for you. There's always someone with an opinion, but you're the one who decides what sticks." I smiled, tucking that advice away. Sometimes it felt like the best armor I had. I worked late more often after Miranda arrived. The last ones out were usually me, Ethan from DevOps, who could troubleshoot anything except his love life, and Lydia, Miranda's assistant, who always left quietly, earbuds in, lost in her own world. The camaraderie of the small team was real. Our code reviews often devolved into debates over the best food truck on 4th or which Seattle indie band was worth a listen. Still, beneath the surface, I could sense the tide shifting. The new module was ready for internal demo ahead of deadline. The leadership team gathered in the glass-walled conference room overlooking Elliott Bay, rain running like veins down the windows. Miranda stood at the head of the table, poised and unreadable. I presented the demo, walking everyone through the architecture and the impact on user analytics. The room responded with polite nods and a brief round of applause. My team grinned at me. Jared gave a thumbs up. But when the project was recapped in the next day's all hands, Miranda credited the analytics department for the success, carefully avoiding my name. It was a small slight, but it stuck. I tried to let it roll off, but the weight of being overlooked pressed harder each time. Later that week, on my way back from a late meeting, I found myself in the elevator with Miranda and 2 VPs. She spoke on her phone, voice clear and decisive, never one for secrets, apparently. "Ava's solid, but she'll never lead. Finish this launch, then let her go." The words hit me harder than I'd admit. I stood frozen, holding my laptop bag and a cold coffee, watching the numbers light up as we climbed floor by floor. When the elevator doors slid open, I let the others go ahead and walked out into the rain. Seattle's drizzle felt heavier than usual, clinging to my coat and soaking into my shoes as I made my way toward my favorite coffee shop. Inside, the warmth was immediate, mismatched mugs stacked behind the counter, the scent of cardamom buns and strong coffee floating in the air. I sat by the window, letting the city blur behind droplets of water. As I stared at my reflection in the glass, I thought about all the times I'd been told to wait my turn, to work harder, to not rock the boat. But now I could feel something shifting inside, a mix of anger and resolve. I remembered Jared's words. Maybe it was time to stop letting others hold the pen. I went home, dried off, and opened my laptop at the kitchen table. The rain hadn't stopped. It drummed a steady rhythm against the window as if cheering me on. I created a new private repository, naming it only with my initials. No fanfare, no grand declarations. Just a quiet promise to myself. If they wanted me gone, they wouldn't get to keep everything I'd built. That night, as I typed lines of code by the glow of the screen, I felt strangely calm. Sometimes, the best way forward is to start something that's yours, even if no one else knows about it yet. And so, I began my plan B one keystroke at a time, while the city slept beneath the rain. They let me finish building the future of Skylab, not realizing I'd already started building my own. All summer, the air in Skylab's office hummed with restless energy, open windows, sunlight bouncing off whiteboards, and the near-constant scent of burnt coffee. Seattle's rare streak of blue sky streamed through the glass, and even the most die-hard engineers ventured out for lunch. But inside, the pressure was mounting. Every time I pushed a new build, Miranda's voice echoed at the back of my mind. She'll never lead. It didn't sting the way it had before. Now, it just made me sharper, more careful. I started triple-checking my commits, reviewing not just for bugs, but for fingerprints. Carlos Alvarez joined my team that June, a junior engineer barely out of college, with a worn-out backpack and a nervous smile. He reminded me of myself, years ago, hungry to prove something. I gave him more responsibility than most would. On Fridays, we'd grab lunch from the taco truck parked outside the office. Carlos loved the al pastor. I preferred chicken with extra salsa. Under the noisy shade of a striped umbrella, he told me about his parents, his dream to build software that actually made people's lives easier. I used to think companies like this were where that happened, he said once, his voice hopeful. Now I'm not so sure. I smiled, nudging his elbow. You'd be surprised what you can change, even when you feel small. The project deadline loomed closer. Miranda ran our daily stand-ups with the intensity of a general, pushing for faster updates, demanding flawless releases. She never said it directly, but it was clear. My time in the spotlight was ending. More than once, I caught her in whispered conversations with management, glancing my way as if I was already on the outside. Jared had left Skylab earlier that year, trading his flannel shirts for consulting gigs and cross-country travel. At the Seattle Tech Expo, I spotted him among the booths, still sipping bad coffee and dispensing advice. We found a quiet spot near the window, the Space Needle gleaming through the haze. Miranda's got everyone on edge, I confessed. Jared grinned, leaning back. They're all watching you, you know. You don't have to stay small just because it's what they expect. Think bigger, Ava. I let the words settle. I'd never seen myself as someone with options beyond Skylab, but maybe it was time to change that. Lydia, as always, moved in the background. She rarely spoke above a whisper, but one afternoon, as we passed in the break room, she paused, holding out a fresh coffee pot. "Just watch your back," she murmured, her gaze flicking to Miranda's office. It was the closest thing to a warning I'd ever gotten from her. Nights grew longer, and I often found myself alone in the glow of my monitors, the office growing silent as the cleaning crew made their rounds. That's when I forked the core repository, quietly copying everything I'd built to an encrypted drive. I wrote a hidden signature deep in the code, something only I could recognize, tucked inside a conditional statement that would never run. It wasn't theft. It was self-preservation. Skylab's product launch came with the usual fanfare, balloons in the cafeteria, the CEO giving a speech, Miranda nodding approvingly as the module I'd built went live. My team cheered, and Carlos beamed at me with pride. I smiled back, knowing the real story lay deeper than the code on display. Afterward, I finished what I'd started. I deleted work chats from my personal phone, closed lingering Slack channels, and ran one last sweep of my local backups. My encrypted repo, named for my childhood street, was the only record of months of quiet innovation. I watched the city lights flicker through the office window, feeling a mix of fear and relief. For the first time, I had an exit strategy, and no one but me knew it existed. On Sunday, Carlos messaged me, asking if I wanted to meet for food truck tacos. We ate in the shade, laughter mixing with the sounds of the fair. He talked about the kind of leader he hoped to be someday, and for a moment, I saw a future not defined by Skylab's walls. That night, I checked my email before bed. There it was, waiting. Subject: my office. 9 a.m. sharp. Miranda never wasted words. The time had come. As I powered down my laptop, I realized my heart wasn't racing with fear. I was ready for whatever Monday would bring. The day started gray and heavy, the kind of January Seattle morning where the sun barely makes an appearance. I rode the elevator to Skylab's top floor, a cold cup of coffee in hand, my thoughts tumbling over each other. Miranda's summons had arrived with all the subtlety of a court order. I'd always wondered what my last day would feel like. I just hadn't expected it to be so quiet. The meeting took place in her glass-walled office, rain streaking the windows, the city blurring beyond. Miranda sat perfectly still, every movement economical, her lips pressed into a thin line. I stood while she spoke, no small talk, no gentle preamble. "Ava, thank you for your contributions to Skylab. The company is restructuring. Effective today, your position is being eliminated due to business needs." She slid a plain envelope across the table. It held a severance agreement and a bullet point list of things I needed to sign before leaving. She didn't look me in the eye. For a moment, I wondered if she felt anything at all. I held my head high, managing a nod. "Thank you for the opportunity," I said, the words tasting hollow. Her face remained unreadable. "IT will escort you out when you're finished." When I walked out of Miranda's office, everything looked suddenly smaller, like the room had shrunk while I wasn't looking. I packed my desk in silence, each click of a box lid echoing the "maybe next time" promises I'd heard over the years. The glass office walls reflected my movements, quick, efficient, impersonal. Lydia drifted by, pausing for the briefest second. She pressed something into my palm, a small USB drive, no label, no explanation. Her lips barely moved as she whispered, "Trust yourself." She walked away before I could thank her. My teammates kept their distance, eyes glued to their monitors. Only Ethan made the short walk across the office, offering an awkward but sincere hug. "You deserved better," he said, voice low. If you ever need a sounding board, you know where to find me." His words meant more than he realized. I left Skylab with a box of belongings, my favorite mug, and a handful of notebooks filled with half-sketched dreams. Outside, the sky was still threatening rain, the city pulsing with people who would never know my name. I didn't cry. I felt oddly light, as if I'd left something heavy behind. I took the long way home, letting my boots carry me to Pike Place Market. Tourists huddled under awnings, the air thick with the scent of coffee and fried fish. I let myself wander, letting the rhythm of the market settle my nerves. I watched a street musician play an old blues song, the notes twisting through the mist. For a moment, I felt like just another face in the crowd, free of expectation, free of title. When my phone buzzed with a text from my father, I sat down on a bench to read it. "Proud of you. You're stronger than they know." He didn't ask if I was okay. He just let me know he was there. I took comfort in that. By dusk, my apartment was a maze of cardboard boxes. I didn't unpack. Instead, I brewed a strong pot of coffee and sat on the floor, the USB drive Lydia had given me resting in my palm. It was empty except for a single folder, personal photos, a handful of motivational quotes, and a note, "You have more power than you think." It was simple, but it reminded me that even when the world turns its back, some people still see you. Restless, I scrolled through my contacts until I landed on Jared's name. We hadn't spoken much since he'd left Skylab, but his advice, "Don't let them write your story," kept resurfacing. He picked up on the second ring, his voice warm and familiar. "Ava, I heard. Want to grab a drink?" We met at a rooftop bar overlooking the city, Seattle's lights scattered beneath the fog. Jared greeted me with a grin and 2 glasses of local IPA. "It's good to see you out of that place," he said, raising his glass. I laughed, surprising myself with how much lighter I felt in his company. It's strange. I thought I'd be devastated, but I just feel ready for something else. Jared leaned forward, eyes bright. "That's what I wanted to talk to you about. I've got a project in mind, a real one, not just some contract gig. But I can't build it alone. I need someone who can see the big picture, who isn't afraid to shake things up. Someone like you." He described his vision for a company that would build technology around people, not just profits, agile, diverse, unafraid to challenge the old way. I hesitated. "You really think we can pull it off?" He smiled. "I know we can, but only if we lead it together." We talked until the city blurred into silver and blue, sketching ideas on cocktail napkins and swapping stories of what Skylab got wrong. Jared didn't patronize or pity me. He saw me as a partner, not just a survivor. The longer we talked, the more certain I became. Finally, I nodded. "Let's show them what we can build." Later that night, back at my apartment, I pinned my old Skylab badge to a corkboard above my desk, a reminder of where I started, and a promise to myself not to let others decide my worth. I opened my laptop, hands steady, heart full of cautious hope. In a new folder, I typed the name Vanguard AI. For the first time in months, I felt the future waiting for me, bright, open, and entirely my own. Every founder's story sounds glamorous until you're actually living it with $200 in your checking account and another night of ramen for dinner. People talk about the romance of startups, the freedom, the late-night inspiration, the thrill of creating something new. They don't mention the endless spreadsheets, the cheap fluorescent lights, or how every no from an investor makes you question your sanity. I used to think surviving Skylab was tough. Turns out, building something from nothing is a different kind of test. Our new office was a rented corner of a co-working space in Belltown, with leaky windows and a fridge that smelled like mystery leftovers. Most days, I got by on takeout dumplings, bottomless coffee, and sheer stubbornness. Jared and I set up shop with 2 folding desks and a whiteboard scavenged from Craigslist, scribbling goals and ideas until the glass was nearly opaque with marker dust. Building the Vanguard AI team felt a lot like assembling a band from Craigslist ads. Mia Patel, our practical, sharp-eyed product manager, joined after a single interview over bagels. Luis Hernandez, an engineer I'd met at a hackathon, arrived with an old laptop and 1,000 ideas, willing to work for equity and a promise that things would get better. Lydia showed up one morning with her favorite mug, a bag of pastries, and a quiet "I'm in." I didn't ask why she left Skylab. Some questions don't need answers. Most days blurred together, strategy sessions fueled by takeout and determination, sticky notes crawling up the windows like neon ivy, and a soundtrack of rain tapping the glass. We ran on adrenaline and hope, every small win celebrated with a high five or an extra slice of greasy pizza. I watched the team come alive, Mia organizing our chaos, Luis pulling all-nighters to squash bugs, Lydia sharing tricks she'd picked up in the back rooms of Skylab. But for every step forward, there was a setback. Fundraising was brutal. We pitched to angel investors and small VCs all over town. Some listened politely, others checked their phones. One gray-haired VC, after my 3rd passionate pitch, shrugged and said, "You're too green. I need a founder who can handle real pressure." He didn't say young woman, but he might as well have. It stung, but I refused to show it. Instead, I turned to my team and kept building. At the end of another 12-hour day, I'd look at their tired but determined faces and remember why I started. Jared would bring in donuts or corny jokes. What do you call an algorithm that's always happy? A cheerful function. And Mia would roll her eyes, but laugh anyway. There was a kind of joy in that shared struggle. Miranda, though, was never far from my mind. I'd hear rumors she'd been spotted at events asking about Vanguard AI or talking to investors who once took my calls. Even with a new company, her shadow lingered. One afternoon, as we prepared to demo for a potential client, Lydia pulled me aside. "Miranda's still got friends in this industry. Don't be surprised if she tries something." I nodded, but inside I felt the chill of old fears returning. We pressed on. Finally, after weeks of meetings and uncertainty, we landed our first real break, a pilot contract with a mid-sized logistics company willing to give Vanguard AI a chance. Mia cried with relief. Luis celebrated by baking brownies in the office toaster oven. It felt like a door finally opening, letting in fresh air after a season of storms. That night, the team gathered on the office floor with greasy pizza, paper plates, and cans of cheap beer. I raised my slice in a toast, grinning wider than I had in months. To building something that's ours. To proving we belong. They cheered, and for a little while, I forgot about everything except the warm glow of possibility. Lydia caught my eye and gave a small, knowing nod. She didn't say anything, but I read her meaning. Enjoy this, but stay sharp. A week later, we set up a small booth at a regional tech expo. It was chaos, bad Wi-Fi, lines for lukewarm coffee, nervous founders handing out business cards like confetti. I'd just finished a demo when I glanced across the crowded floor and saw Miranda. She stood in a navy suit, speaking with a group of execs, her presence somehow colder and sharper than before. For a moment, our eyes met. Her lips curled in a faint, inscrutable smile. There was no need for words. I understood, suddenly and completely, that this was no longer just business. It was personal. She would not let me go quietly. That night, as we packed up, my phone buzzed with an anonymous email. Subject: Warning. Message: Miranda is coming for your code. Be ready. I stared at the screen, a chill prickling the back of my neck. I thought about my team, about what we'd built, about how far we still had to go. Then I closed my eyes, took a steady breath, and started making plans. Miranda had power, money, and lawyers. I had a team, a vision, and the truth. The email came at 7:05 a.m. on a Tuesday in February. The subject line was sterile, almost forgettable. Notice of legal action. Inside, the words were sharper, formal language accusing me of intellectual property theft, breach of contract, unfair competition. Miranda's name appeared only once, but her fingerprints were all over it. By noon, the news had broken on 3 tech blogs. My phone buzzed with interview requests, LinkedIn messages, and worried texts from old colleagues. Headlines ranged from ex-Skylab engineer accused of stealing code to Vanguard AI in hot water. I read each article in a kind of numb haze. Was this what losing everything felt like? Our conference room, really just a borrowed office with a folding table, became a war room. Mia paced with her phone pressed to her ear. Luis pored over the codebase. Jared made frantic calls to every lawyer he'd ever met. Lydia sat quietly in the corner, typing steadily, a look of fierce concentration on her face. The first team meeting after the lawsuit was a low point. Mia's hands shook as she handed out printouts. If we fight this, we could lose everything: funding, clients, our reputations. Luis looked at me, his voice barely above a whisper. Ava, maybe we're in over our heads. Even Jared, always steady, seemed tired. We have to be smart. Maybe it's time to cut our losses. I wanted to scream, but instead I reached for the USB drive Lydia had given me months ago. Turning it over in my hand, I remembered her words. Trust yourself. I'm not running, I told them. We didn't steal anything. We built this together. If Miranda thinks she can scare us off, she's in for a surprise. They stared at me, uncertain. But sometimes all a team needs is someone to hold the line. The days blurred into strategy sessions, emergency calls, and anxious coffee breaks. Our inboxes filled with questions from journalists and nervous clients. Most of the time, I felt like I was treading water in a storm. But then, late one night, Lydia sent me an email with the subject line, Evidence. Attached were screenshots, internal Skylab emails, timestamped code commits, and a draft press release Miranda had written weeks before the lawsuit. The details made it clear Miranda had orchestrated everything. She'd even edited old commit logs to make it look like my work was hers. Armed with this, Jared reached out to our biggest potential client, a global shipping firm on the fence because of the lawsuit. He explained the situation and sent them the files. Their legal team reviewed everything, and by Friday, they agreed to hold off judgment until the dust settled. It wasn't a victory, but it was a lifeline. The real turning point came when I was invited to speak at a Women in Tech panel downtown. I almost said no. I felt like a fraud, scared and exposed. But Mia squeezed my hand, and Jared simply said, "You're the story. Tell it your way." The room was packed: young coders, founders, and students scribbling notes. I stepped up to the mic, heart pounding. I was told I'd never be leadership material, I began. I was told to play it safe, to keep my head down, to let others take the credit for my work. But I'm here because I didn't listen. I told the truth about Skylab, about starting over, about fear and resilience, and the power of a team who believes in something bigger than themselves. When I finished, there was a silence, then applause that built, wave after wave. Someone posted a clip online. By morning, it had gone viral. Messages poured in from women across the country. Thank you for saying what I've lived. That weekend, a journalist published a story using Lydia's evidence. The narrative flipped almost overnight. Skylab's legal gambit exposed read one headline. Miranda's tactics, her manipulation of records, her quiet campaign to smear us, were laid bare. The next industry event felt like entering the lion's den. The expo center buzzed with rumor and sideways glances. But I stood tall. When a rival engineer tried to snub me in the buffet line, Ethan, who'd left Skylab himself, stepped in, smiling. Looks like the real talent landed on her feet. At the afternoon panel, I was asked directly about the lawsuit. I met the question head-on. Here's what really happened, I said, projecting my voice for the room and the cameras. Our team built Vanguard AI from the ground up. Any suggestion otherwise is not just wrong, it's a lie. Lydia's documents were published that night by 3 more outlets. The evidence was overwhelming. The tide had finally turned. I could feel it in the way people spoke to me, not as a scandal, but as a survivor. The next morning, our team took a walk through Pike Place Market, the air fresh with the smell of tulips and fresh bread. Mia and Luis argued over the best pastry shop. Jared snapped pictures, and for the first time in months, we laughed like the world was new. Lydia lingered behind, her eyes gentle. You did good, Ava, she whispered. You really did. I thought that would be the end, but Miranda wasn't done. That night, my phone rang, her number, flashing on the screen. I answered, holding my breath. Her voice was cold, controlled. You haven't won yet. Not until I'm out of the game for good. She hung up before I could reply, leaving only static and the sense of another battle on the horizon. Victory never looks like you imagined. It's quieter, deeper, a kind of peace that settles into your bones and makes you grateful for every hard mile behind you. The first cold snap of winter painted Seattle's rooftops silver as I unlocked the doors to Vanguard AI's new office, sunlight pouring through tall windows onto polished floors. Our logo, clean and bold, caught the morning light. Even the scent of fresh paint and strong coffee felt like a promise. Sometimes I paused by the window, watching the city's energy swirl below, and thought about that old rain-soaked afternoon when I was told I wasn't leadership material. It was funny how those words, meant to cut me down, had become the very fire that carried me here. This wasn't just my win. It was ours. Jared greeted me with a grin, holding a box of donuts from our favorite place in Belltown. Signing day, he said, handing me a glazed twist. Remember when all we had was hope and a second-hand whiteboard? By noon, the news broke. Vanguard AI had landed the global partnership we'd chased for 2 years, officially overtaking Skylab for the largest deal in their sector. Emails poured in from journalists, former colleagues, even my old engineering professor. Mia wept and laughed at the same time, her spreadsheets finally vindicated. Luis led a cheer, tossing a handful of confetti he'd stashed for the big one. Ethan, now part of the team, lifted his mug in a toast. No more secrets, no more boys' clubs. This is what tech should be. It wasn't all headlines and parties. Miranda's shadow still lingered. I saw her name on the press release announcing her resignation, clean, polite, stripped of any warmth. She asked to meet one last time. We sat in a corner booth of a quiet cafe, the city's noise muffled by thick windows. Miranda's posture was stiff, her eyes tired but clear. For a moment, I wondered what it cost her to sit across from me, the so-called not a leader who had become her competition. She slid an envelope across the table. "You changed the game," she said, voice low. "I don't expect forgiveness, but I respect what you built." She stood, coat buttoned, leaving before I could answer. In the envelope was a short note. "You were always more than they let you be. MP." I tucked it into my journal, letting gratitude settle where old resentment used to live. I wouldn't erase the past, but I was done letting it define me. We celebrated that night, team dinner in a neon-lit bistro, music loud and laughter louder. Lydia shared stories from her earliest days in tech. Mia toasted to the chaos that made us family. Luis promised to invent an AI that could plan happy hour. Even Ethan danced, clapping me on the back. Jared caught my eye. "You let us hear, Ava. Never doubt it." The days that followed blurred into interviews, congratulations, and the steady pulse of building something that now belonged, truly, to us. The highlight was the keynote at a major tech conference. I stood beneath bright lights, heart thudding, looking out at a sea of faces, young women, seasoned engineers, hopeful founders. "I was told I'd never be a leader," I began, my voice steadier than I felt. "But leadership isn't about a title or a corner office. It's about building something real together. It's about trusting your instincts, even when you're scared. It's about rewriting the story when the old one doesn't fit." The applause was thunderous. Someone handed me a note afterward. "Thank you for making space for the rest of us." Later that week, my father took me out for dinner at a little Italian place on Queen, and we didn't talk much about work. He just smiled across the table and said, "You look happy, Ava." That's all I ever wanted. Night fell over the city as I climbed the stairs to my favorite rooftop, the skyline sparkling with winter lights. I breathed in the cold air, feeling the hum of possibility all around me. My phone buzzed, a new partnership offer, another door opening. I smiled, closing my eyes, letting everything sink in. This is just the start. Below, Seattle shimmered, a city of second chances, of storms weathered and dreams rebuilt. I tucked Miranda's note into my journal and turned to face the night, ready for whatever would come next. Sometimes the greatest victories are found not in headlines, but in the quiet moments, like sharing a meal with family or finding the courage to forgive those who once doubted us. Through every trial, I learned that resilience and kindness can open doors where ambition alone cannot. In life, if we support each other and stay true to our values, even the hardest journeys can lead us home. If this story touched your heart, I invite you to share your own reflections or memories. After all, our journeys are richer when we travel together.